but I miss specialist radio. I revel in listening to radio presenters who love what they're into and curate it and share it. And I think that in the mainstream form of media consumption that has gone away,
Yeah.
and that has been marginalized, and I think that's a real shame.
Welcome to For the Record, a casual, mostly unedited conversation series presented by Greenmount, where we speak with music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice.
Today on episode 55, I spoke with Dougal Perman. For more than 2 decades, Dougal has been an important figure in Scotland's music industry. In 2001, he co-founded Radio Magnetic, one of the UK's pioneering internet radio stations. His leadership extended to the Scottish Music Industry Association, where he served as chair from 2016 to 2023. During his tenure, Dougal played a pivotal role in launching and developing the Scottish Album of the Year Award, now recognised as Scotland's National Music Prize. He also loves playing music. He began DJing at 16, running hip-hop clubs in Edinburgh and Glasgow. He also plays piano, guitar, and oboe, and occasionally creates electronic music. He believes that music is in all of us. It's part of what makes us human. We chatted about all of this, plus the labors of early online radio, the sea changes of the industry, and of course, we discussed many a great record. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hey, Dougal, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Keegan. It's very nice to be here. I'm delighted to have been asked.
Of course.
Because it's such an interesting podcast that you've got.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So, yeah, with all of these, we like to start at the beginning, and would love to hear a bit about your origins, where you grew up, and then specifically how, when your relationship with music started.
Sure. It's funny, I was thinking about this kind of thing last week at a friend's birthday party where I met an exuberantly drunk Frenchman who tried to sell me graphic design services and then poured his heart out to me about how his family don't support him being a creative person and would be much happier if he worked for Peugeot or something like that. And he went on at length about this. And he said, "Do you understand where I'm coming from?" I said, "I do understand, but I'm afraid I'm lucky that I can't relate to it because I grew up in a very creative family with parents who are very supportive and, in fact, very encouraging of my 2 younger brothers and I to be creative in all forms, but especially with music. And so grew up listening to a lot of the music that my parents loved and played to us, which ranged from kind of my dad's fanatical about blues, my mum into kind of, she was like, soul was where they met in the middle, really. I think soul and Motown especially. My mum probably more into mod kind of music, The Who, right through to kind of Ian Dury and some shades of punk. They both love jazz, a lot of interesting, challenging classical music. So I was brought up on all of that, which I found was great. It was really loads of stuff to explore there, and I think the first record I was ever bought was the Jungle Book soundtrack, which I still maintain is one of the best jazz albums ever. Certainly jazz soundtrack albums ever. Which upsets people in the Scottish jazz scene when I say it. But I do love it. And I grew up, like, I started learning the piano from a very early age, from I don't know, 5 or 6, but then only did it for a couple of years because my teachers moved away. And I asked my mum recently, why didn't I continue when the second teacher could no longer teach me? And she said, I don't really know. And and like my children who are 5 and 10 are learning to play the piano, and we got a piano at home a few years ago from friends of my parents who no longer had a use for their second piano, and they say it's I don't know what's 150 years old. It's got a very mellow tone, but it's got a nice sound. And they said, look, as long as you play it, you're welcome to have it.
Hmm.
And it was lovely to have a piano back in the house again. Sorry, I realised my phone's not on airplane. Get rid of it. And so yeah, it was lovely to have a piano back in the house, and it reminded me of growing up trying to learn, and then went on to play various other instruments. But yeah, music was part of my life from a very early age.
Cool. Yeah, that reminds me of my own childhood. My mom was my piano teacher, actually, and I started playing when I was about 4,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got to age 12 or so, and I remember going up to her and just kind of being tired of the routine and the cadence of practicing like all the things that entails, and just wanted to go do dumb things with my friends,
Yeah,
and telling her I'm not going to do this anymore, and she's like, you're going to regret not doing that. And sure enough, I did.
yeah, I know. It's hard. Like I've reflected on that with my children, especially with my son. I was like, oh, I can't be bothered practicing, or "Oh, I don't want to go to my piano lesson." I hear myself saying what my parents said to me: "You'll regret it. I wish I'd kept it up."
Yeah,
And I was like, how can I say this in a way that
they're going
you
to
might
actually pay
connect to them?
attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me what happened next after you started. You played the piano, pursuing other instruments. What was the next chapter in your music?
I suppose like at primary school, the way it worked in Edinburgh where I grew up, I think the way it worked with instrumental teaching in school was that each different primary school had a set instrument,
Hmm.
and ours was the cello. And so I started playing. I played the cello through primary school, and I got in I think in the last year or two of primary 6 and primary 7, aged about 10, 11. I was invited to join the regional orchestra and regional schools orchestra, and me and another classmate would travel across town to go to this, and we were quite bewildered by it. The experience was a bit overwhelming, but exciting to play in an orchestra.
Hmm.
And and I enjoyed that. And then when I went to high school, and I like the cello, it's a it's a great instrument. It's very versatile. But when I went to high school, all of the places for the cello were full up.
Hmm.
I was quite interested in guitar because my dad played guitar, and I think I was probably playing around with his guitar by that point anyway. But all there was no space to play guitar, and in a kind of impulsive move, I opted for the oboe because I'd once been to a Scottish Chamber Orchestra concert for children where they let everybody come up and have a go on the instruments. And I got a sound out of the oboe, and the oboist was like, "Well, it's not everyone who can do that. That's great." and so yeah, I started playing that, and I still think that the oboe, with the possible exception of the bagpipes, the oboe and the violin are two of the most challenging instruments to get a nice sound out of
Hmm.
for the first 2 years.
Hmm.
And I remember the head of music at school once telling me gleefully um, that Rachmaninoff, I'm sure this is apocryphal, but Rachmaninoff had said that a gentleman is someone who can play the oboe but doesn't. And I've heard that attributed to many different instruments, but and composers. But
Yeah.
uh, I did, I persevered, and I got to be quite good at it, and joined the school wind band, and we had a really. I went to a school that had a specialist music unit attached to it, and so um, a third, like there were some students who were especially talented at music, and they spent a third of their timetable just doing instrumental music. Um, Maybe it was even more than a third. And but the result of that meant the rest of us who weren't in the specialist unit benefited from fantastic instrumental teaching, great facilities, and there was a wind band, a string ensemble, percussion ensemble. There was like lots of opportunity, and then loads of bands would spring up around that because there was just all these kids playing music and creating together and having a great time. And then there was, a great social life around there. I went away to on band camp long before American Pie, uh, and it was, it was brilliant. And there was a school jazz band sprung up, and I was in that, but I played the guitar in that because by that point I taught myself the guitar. My dad taught me a little bit, and I bought a bass guitar um, with all my pocket money when I was probably 13 or 14, and really liked playing the bass. And by that time, I had at 13, it was the first proper gig I ever went to, and that was the Temptations doing a reformed tour, and they played the Usher Hall in Edinburgh to a very small crowd because it was really badly promoted. We went with one of my best friends and his family, who were good friends with my family, and the two families went, and we all had an amazing time. And the Temptations played as if they were playing a sellout show at the Apollo, and it was incredible. And it just, I didn't really know much of their music at 13, but it really opened my. At that point, I was listening to Iron Maiden, and I just found heavy metal, and I was really into that, and just getting into Led Zeppelin, and um, and then I was suddenly introduced to really properly to Motown, and that kind of opened my ears to a whole new sound, and then yeah, I like sort of would play around with teaching, trying to learn um, stuff that I was into, stuff that my parents were into, which ranged from, yeah, it was a lot of like soul and Motown and rock and roll, blues, and Led Zeppelin, like hard rock kind of stuff like Led Zeppelin. Tried a bit of Frank Zappa, oh, that's a bit too difficult. Um, and so just, yeah, playing a lot of music and playing with friends, because like so many of my friends at school played music, and playing in lots of different little bands, and eventually joining a kind of funk rock band. And um, and then, but meanwhile, through listening to lots of different stuff, and a pivotal moment being my granny uh, in Perth, about an hour's drive north of Edinburgh, had MTV because the terrestrial television reception was bad in her area, and they had cable TV. So she had MTV. So me and my younger brother, 3 years younger, would watch MTV when we went to visit. And I remember one day seeing Nirvana um, played "Smells Like Teen Spirit" when it just came out. That completely changed my life, because at that until that point, I thought, well, I really like hard rock music, but I've not found anything contemporary that I really like, that I'm really into. I just don't think there's any modern music that kind of excites me. And then I heard grunge, and I became obsessed with it for a few years, and but still kind of enjoyed listening to a wide range of stuff. And then I think age about 16, started playing around with trying to DJ. And me and my brother would have parties for friends that would come round, and my parents were quite facilitating of it. And we put two turntables together with an amp that my parents had that had separate right and left channel faders,
Mm.
and we bodged a way of I think it actually just used like 2 speakers per channel and put them next to each other so we could emulate a PA system, like really, really uh, sort of clunky DIY
Cool.
in danger of blowing up the speakers, especially the volume we played them at. But we sort of built our own DJ turntable setup very crudely, and then we would, by that point we were buying lots of records that ranged from kind of Scottish indie music to hip hop, and then the kind of acid jazz, Talking Loud scene had really blown up, and we got really into that, and a lot of hip hop. And then as we got a little bit older, some electronic stuff, some electro, some techno, and eventually house music. And so all of that was going on as well, and got really into a broad kind of eclectic electronic scene. Um, and yeah, that kind of, I suppose, takes me up to the end of school.
Cool. Yeah, I'm curious throughout this time. I mean, was music, you I mean, it's very clearly a passion for you. But did it feel more than just, a thing that you pursued to listen to absorb yourself? And did it like already at this time were you starting to think about music as part of your career?
Probably, yeah. So, like my younger brother Tommy always had an amazing flair for visual art as an artist, and he was a painter, and he was very set on studying art, and eventually went to art school in Aberdeen, and he works as an illustrator and graphic designer and general conceptual visual artist, as well as does a lot of music. And our youngest brother, Bobby, didn't really engage very much academically at school, but when he played the drums from the age of 6 and was really good, but he then showed a flair for music production when he was in his early teens, and really went for that. And he's a music producer these days, has been all through his kind of adult life, actually, although he's worked for me quite a bit too, and I can speak about what I do in a moment. But I had always been really interested in writing, and my parents are both journalists. I grew up in a kind of literary environment, and they also proofread all my homework. I would probably learned proofreading marks at the same time as learning grammar and punctuation, a lot of it from them. And so I always saw myself being a journalist and going into magazine journalism, really. And I, I was quite into the idea of being a music journalist for quite a long time, but I didn't like a lot of music journalism from like the NME and Melody Maker stuff that I just found a bit over the top. And then I started to discover, I sort of would read mainstream American stuff like Rolling Stone, and started to discover more esoteric magazines like Wire, uh, and music making publications as well, which I found really interesting, to get the kind of partly to read about music and kit and stuff, but also how the music was made, and I was really interested in that. But I suppose I had always, like, I had visions of um, running a music magazine, I think, and and through my teens, probably from like 12 or 13, my brother Tommy and I ran had our own project with a satirical magazine that we called the Understandably Obscure, which was kind of influenced by Private Eye and various sort of satiricals and Punch and Viz and like UK satirical publications, and we did a lot about music, but it was also kind of irreverently, slightly political, quite in your face activist sort of stuff. And so I was really interested in, I thought I would go into magazine when my dad ran a publishing company. And so I was really inspired by that. And I thought I'd probably go into the magazine world. And then when I was at university, was two highly influential things that changed my path were getting really involved with the student radio station, Club City Radio, which was very cool at that point, and like was kind of obsessively involved in the Glasgow club scene and live music scene. I went to university in Glasgow. I became immersed in that as well from right from the first week I was there, because there was so like the nightlife in Glasgow was phenomenal, and there was so much on offer. Um, loads of great, loads of clubs, loads of great live music venues. I mean, it's still like that today, but it just seemed on fire at that time in the late 90s. And so becoming very involved each year, more so involved in the 4 years that I was at university with the student radio, where as a contributor, as a program maker and DJ, doing a variety of different shows. I started the first live music sessions show that they'd ever had.
Cool.
With just because we found some kit that we were like, we could do live music sessions with this like huge Soundcraft desk, that we had no idea how to use, and we just taught ourselves, like me and a friend, taught ourselves how to use this stuff, and like found a load of microphones and thought, let's give it a go, and I managed to do some turned into what became a kind of flagship live sessions show, and we had some bands who went on to be very successful, and like I'm pretty sure that we gave Biffy Clyro their first ever radio session, and there was so I was really interested in that in Subcity, and loved it. Was the program controller one year. They would typically do one or two short-term 28-day restricted service license, so called, like a temporary FM license. Till eventually, it went online when that became viable, but which was not during my time there. And I was production manager for 1 year, and so I learned loads from that. And my parents were broadly supportive of it, but also cautious that I get a degree, because that was the point of being there. And I was studying theatre studies and English, and I loved that. And the angle I pursued in theatre was the use of live music in contemporary Scottish theatre. And I would put together like compose and arrange and curate music for plays, extra to my course. But there was a couple of student theatre companies, well, one run by one of my tutors, that I was involved in as musical director. So there was still that live music thing going on. I had dabbled in club and gig promotion as well. Initially myself, well, always with friends, but like ran a hip hop club in Edinburgh, then did some hip hop nights in Glasgow, and then some more kind of eclectic live music sessions recorded for the radio. Learned how to lose a lot of money in gig and what a challenging task that was. And then one summer, my second year at university, went to New York for the summer with my best friend from school, Paddy, and we spent the summer we tried to find work, and I managed to get a paid internship at a PBS station, Channel 13, and I worked in the graphic design department because I'd done quite a lot of design of magazine and newspaper stuff, including my own project, and so I was in the kind of publicity and merchandise packaging and some on-air 2D graphics and stuff, and learned loads and learned how a kind of big corporation works. And it was just 5 weeks that I worked there, but it was really influential on me, and kind of furthered my interest in broadcast, and opened my eyes to TV as well as radio. And but one of the things I loved about radio was the immediacy of it, because kind of, all you need is an idea and a microphone, and you can have a radio show.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a bit more to it than that, but it just because you don't have the visual of TV, or this is way before internet media was really a viable thing, because we're still in dial-up modem days, 14K dial-up modems, and at this point. So with print, you've got the very fastest the next day, if not the next week or month, with magazines. So radio was super exciting because it was so immediate. And then I suppose there was a third influence on me, was in the final year, or just the summer before my final year at university. My closest friend at university, Tom, and I worked at a fringe venue in Edinburgh called Cafe Graffiti, which had by day and in the evening an incredible selection of world music from all over, that very interesting, unusual music and sort of performance art. And then in the evening, really great jazz, funk, and hip hop nightclubs.
Cool.
And we worked there all summer and in the box office, and the two of us sold more tickets than anybody else by having a laugh and like really connecting with all the performers, and then relating that stuff to the customers. But we also saw this incredibly, amazing amazing company, amazing outfit lose tens of thousands, probably 100,000 plus over the course of the festival, and went bankrupt.
Wow.
And we were just dismayed and saddened by this. And we were saying to the box office manager, there must be a way to run an arts company and make money. And she's like, there's not. She said, you're studying theatre, you must know there isn't. I just refused to accept that. And we studied arts funding, and we were like, really, this business model just doesn't work. And theatre is really expensive. Classical music is horrendously expensive. But even like, we were like, okay, so rock, pop, electronic music can make money, but it's on a knife edge. It can make unlimited money, really, if you hit the big time, but there's so few that would do that.
Right.
But we're like, we'd like to do something in this world. And then when Tom and I worked very closely together at the student radio station, as well as being on the same theatre course. And then we discovered we could work really well together when we worked at Cafe Graffiti as well. So when we graduated and we both got decent degrees, Tom and his girlfriend had come to hang out and go to a club night in Edinburgh. And the next day we were having breakfast, and my dad joined us for a chat. And he said, "What do you want to do, Tom?" And Tom was like, "Well, I don't want to go back to London, where he's from, just yet. I want to stay in Glasgow, but I don't really know what to do." And my dad was like, "What about working in radio?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't. There's nothing at the BBC, and the commercial radio is not inspiring." And and he said, "Why don't you and Dougal start an internet radio station?"
Mhm.
Or he said, "Why don't you start a radio station?" And Tom was like, "Well, that would be amazing, but you
Mm.
couldn't get an FM license." He said, "You don't need one if you do it online."
Mm.
And so we talked about it, and we were like, "Yeah, why not?" So we did. So we started our company Inner Ear, and 6 months later, after a lot of learning and trying to find uh, trying to find ways to do this resourcefully and for low budget, we started our internet radio station project, Radio Magnetic, and it grew and grew and grew in terms of popularity. So this was 2001, and it was very early days. But yeah, that's kind of, I suppose that's a long-winded way of answering your question of my journey into working in music media.
You know, it was amazing. Thank you for sharing. Um, yeah, I would love to hear more about those early days of Radio Magnetic. Like what, I mean, you were young and like creating this radio station on this, what at the time was like still a novel format. Um, yeah, I'm curious to hear about that growth process. Just like, what was the promotion process in your end like? Who were some of the artists that first, or the artists, the DJs, the hosts, the curators who were first starting to come to the platform?
um, the so yeah, when we started it well before we were ready.
Mm.
But Tom's brother Max, Max Lasada, who went on to be just recently stood down as chief exec and chair of Warner Music UK. So Max was at that point running a really cool underground electronic label, Ultimate Dilemma, which he was just about to merge with Mushroom Records, and he went on a kind of steady progression, working his way up independent and then major label music ladder, and he's been a pioneer in the recorded music world, and so he was a great source of advice in the early days, as was my dad, who, although he had always worked in print, had done some work with a Canadian um, cable network who had the Canadian version of MTV, Much Music, which was very exciting for us because it didn't happen eventually because the cable market in the UK wasn't, especially in Scotland, wasn't there. I just wouldn't have supported it. But he had a perspective on that and was very encouraging of us. So we started it in March, the 19th of March 2001, way before we were ready to do it. But Max was like, just start doing it, start making mistakes, and just try it. And you'll never be ready, so just do it. And we were learning about the technology, which was a very steep learning curve. And because we did a launch event before we left Subcity about Subcity entering internet radio and live streaming, but we had no idea how to do it. But we launched it anyway because we were like, it's a statement of intent.
Yeah.
And we discovered we were quite good at promoting things, even if we had to then go away and figure out how to make it happen. And the following year, we ended up teaching Subcity how to start streaming online with internet radio. But yeah, we we'd met loads of people in the music scene through Subcity, so we already had a good grounding and a great network. And when we came up with the name Radio Magnetic, which I think was one of Tom's back of an envelope scribbling ideas, which took us 3 months after I think my dad had on the back of an envelope written Inner Ear down as a possible company name. We're like, yeah, that's quite good, yeah. And then 3 months later came up with Radio Magnetic, and then we started. I spoke to lots of different people, and the first batch of presenters and DJs included Probably most notable was Soma Records, and we went to them for Slam, their flagship act, but it ended up being the marketing manager, Jim Hutchison, and then the head of Slam Events, their nightclub arm and electronic music, well, the live kind of aspect of the partner with the record label, Craig Caldwell, and the two of them did a show. Max advises to name all of the radio programs with radiomagnetic related names. So we, I called the initial batch of shows. Mine was called Magnetism. The one that Soma did was called Magnetic North. And then there was one that Soma's sister label Phonetic did, which was kind of beatsy electronic hip hop stuff. There was a guy called Paul Colley who ran a great club night. Oh, I've forgotten what that was called now.
It's all right.
He'll kill me if he sees this. But what, like, we loved it, and Paul was really supportive in the early days, and he was enthusiastic about the idea. And there was a drum and bass DJ that we approached, Tanya Swift, who she was very big in the Scottish drum and bass scene at the time, and she was on board from the early days, and a music plugger and DJ and sometime tour manager for Chicks on Speed, Jill Mingo, who brought a kind of strange selection of weird offbeat pop, I suppose, and from strange, quirky offbeat pop to deranged post-punk and brilliant electro house, and so she had that kind of off-kilter thing, and then they were the kind of initial batch, and then we just started going to see and speak to everyone that we liked in the Scottish music scene, and it was broadly an underground electronic music, but we quite quickly added all the stuff that we were really into as well. So it was hip hop, soul, jazz, the kind of indie music that people who like dance music also listen to. how we described the indie music that we liked, and then kind of melodic electronica, ambient downbeat stuff, and it grew and grew, and it was very DIY in the early days, but we tried to run it as professionally as possible. We had a drive time daytime presenter, because we modeled it off of FM radio, and then we kind of switched that up to, it was all the presented shows with specialist shows, but then we had playlisted stuff when it wasn't live presented. We ran it as a live radio station 24/7 for 5 years, which is incredibly labor intensive. But we started to experiment with we did do some live session stuff as well. We started with using Subcity's studio during the summer when the university wasn't there. We did a contra deal with the Student Representative Council, and said, in return for teaching them how to stream online, could we use the studio for 6 months? So that got us up and running, and then we moved into our own premises, which was let to us by the Sub Club, Glasgow, arguably Glasgow's coolest and most reputable nightclub, famous the world over. So the managers of that and two promoters who went on to set up an experiential marketing agency called Better Days, who ran a really interesting music festival called Triptych, which was sponsored by Tenants Lager, but was like, unlike a lot of the other stuff that Tenants did, which was very mainstream, most notably Tea in the Park Music Festival, which was the second biggest festival in the UK after Glastonbury. The Triptych was everything, was basically everything that Radio Magnetic was about. So we were already quite friendly with them, and they offered us. They said, "Well, you could rent some rooms in our place," and they were delighted to have us. So our studio was there. It became a total hangout for people in the kind of anywhere in underground and alternative music, and then eventually we moved down to this area called the Hidden Lane, in the Finnieston area of Glasgow, which was where it really sort of took off as a kind of hangout place. Sometimes too much, sometimes to the point where we couldn't get any peace because there would just be people dropping in all the time. But like, and it was, the studio was sometimes a bit of a party zone, but it was amazing. And we had started quite early on. We started doing live broadcasts from clubs and sometimes festivals. And we recorded a lot of stuff as well, but we worked out how to broadcast from the club. So we would stream it from a venue back into our studio and then out through there. So
Cool.
we look like it got to like in the first, well, in the second and third year of our kind of full live 24/7 tenure, we were sometimes we were doing 3 different broadcasts a week, and there was a core team of 4 of us who ran the
Wow.
station, and then a network of part-time and volunteer helpers, and then 70 different specialist shows, many of which were live from the studio. A few were live from other places. The Underground Solution record shop in Edinburgh did one live from their record shop, Rubadub Records. They would typically come into the studio and do it actually because they were nearby in Glasgow. But we also had contributions from Ninja Tune in London and Grand Central Records in Manchester, and some from labels in Europe, around Europe as well, like Compost and Compact. And yeah, it was nuts. It went, it was far bigger than we could really handle resource-wise.
Mm.
And I think we were reaching like 150, 250,000
Wow.
listeners a month. But it was really hard to make any money from it
Yeah,
because
as
we
it
were
is.
well ahead of the market. So, and costs started rising. Um, and then music licensing became an issue because PPL, the recorded music licensing body in the UK, who had never made up their mind what they were going to do about licensing online music, unlike PRS, who the Performing Rights Society for publishing rights, who had been quicker and more agile to get into that and came up with a very reasonable music license. Because at first they just licensed, well, they either didn't bother or we tried to obtain licenses from them. They put us off a bit, and then they would just sell us licenses based on the FM model,
Mm-hmm.
we would argue a scaled down version of it. But then PPL came out with their first webcast license, which was exorbitantly expensive, and just would have been completely infeasible to work. And that also, coupled with the massive resource issues that we had with running a full live 24/7 station, with the amount of live outside broadcasts we were doing and so on. And we were bringing in money. We were selling some sponsorship and advertising, but not nearly enough. But we'd been approached to create content for other people, and we did a lot of teaching and workshops as well, because we were approached to do that. Especially like quite a lot of stuff for young people, people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we met some amazing people through all that. But yeah, it came to a point in December 2005 when we realized we had to wrap up the live broadcast. In January 2006, we ended the live broadcast, but I was like, I don't want to kill this. There's too much there. So just flipped it to being on demand and podcast based, and I kind of entered a new phase, and took a lot of the presenters with us. Not all of them wanted to, but a lot, and then picked up a lot of other shows and kept doing it whilst pivoting the company into being a production company and creating content for other people, which was a more steady and reliable source of income. But the biggest project that we did as a production company came to us because of Radio Magnetic. So in some ways it became like a very very quirky way of advertising the company. And so we kind of developed as a production company, doing a lot of that, and it's still to this day the client base that we have is a mixture of arts and cultural organizations and consumer brands who want to do arts and entertainment projects. And so music has always been a dominant force throughout that.
Yeah, no, thank you, for all of that. It's incredibly fascinating. And yeah, I mean, I have one question, just, being cognizant of time. I have one
Yeah, I've just
question.
noticed. I'm sorry, I spoke so much about.
No, it's great. I mean, I wish we just had, 3 hours to just, work our way
Yeah.
through the entirety of the streaming era and all of that. But I actually do have, before moving on to to part two, I am curious. I know we are skipping over the entirety of the streaming era, and a lot has happened, to music, in that transition. But I'm curious, past 2 decades from where we've left off, then to now, if you could point to one thing that no longer exists that you miss, and one thing that has improved, one thing that you are grateful that exists now in the music industry, as it works today, that you didn't have then.
Oh, those are amazing questions. Right. Well, I'll start with the second one because it's a bit easier. I don't know if this fully answers the second question, but internet connectivity is a game changer.
Sure.
Because when we, even when we finished the live 24/7 broadcast and through our evolution and on-demand and podcast stuff, we were still like, we had cable modems, but they were half a meg, and it seems incredible that we were able to do all that. Audio streaming doesn't take a huge amount of bandwidth, but it was connectivity was always a big issue. And through our evolution as a production company, when we got into video streaming, it was really seriously around like 2011, 2012, then connectivity's always been an issue. And then really when kind of optical fiber connections came
Mm-hmm.
out, and then now as full fiber broadband is rolling out, still not it's not everywhere by any means. Like we have it at work in my studio here. We don't have it at home. Sometimes I'm actually pleased about that because, but that has been an absolute game changer in the way that entertainment media works.
Sure.
And so it facilitates us to go and broadcast from places that we never could have before, and making kind of cultural entertainment programs. Um, and certainly when those programs involve music, we want to be able to broadcast that with the best possible sound quality and do it justice with video. And we're able to when we have great connections. Uh, but the you said you referenced the evolution of streaming platforms for
Mm-hmm.
on-demand consumption of music, and that has changed the game considerably, not always for the better,
Mm-hmm.
in how people consume music, and that just simply wouldn't be possible without the connectivity.
Right.
So yeah, I think that is the big game changer, really, for me. What I miss that's no longer here. Well, I wouldn't say record shops because they are still there, but
Mm-hmm.
you do have to look harder for them. There's not nearly as many, and some of them have moved a lot into selling gear instead, selling music making equipment, which is cool, but it's not a record shop. It's a
Yeah.
general, a holistic kind of music shop. Um, there are some that you go to though, which are still all about buying records, and I love that because I think that's a very it's tangible and it's real, and you meet people in the music scenes that those shops cater for. But there's not nearly as much of that as there used to be, and that's a shame. And even like downloadable music, there's just whilst there are, I'm a huge fan of Bandcamp
Mm-hmm.
as a platform that straddles, not really a streaming platform, but it is, but it's mostly around buying music.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, But shops like, I was always a big fan of bleep.com and shops like that. And just having, it's so rare that people actually tangibly own music
Yeah.
now, and I think, although I do know a lot of people, vinyl's never gone away, and um, and lots of people still like buying records. I think there's actually a bit of a return to CDs.
Mm-hmm.
There are labels that are releasing on cassette tapes. Uh, I get it, but I think that's just that I don't miss that format.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of do nostalgically from making mixtapes, and
Sure.
you
Yeah.
but I far preferred making mixtapes on CD, um, because it was so much easier.
Yeah.
But and the quality was so much better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I don't know. I suppose that there's some sort of formats and the ways that we consume music that I kind of miss, that I felt were a bit more social,
Mm-hmm.
or and where you actually had, even if it was just an MP3, it resided on your hard drive, and you had the music. And uh, I think I do think it devalues music to
Yeah.
not have
I agree.
to not own the product, and where you're actually just renting the right to listen to it from
Mm.
the service provider.
Yeah.
Same with film and TV.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's led to kind of abstract, that kind of abstraction of context, with the platform in the middle where, you start to notice people saying things like, I'm going to stream Netflix, I'm going to watch Netflix, I'm going to, listen to Spotify,
Mm,
um, which is kind of a scary abstraction when you think about it, because,
yeah.
I mean, that's a platform. They're a service provider. They're not the art. They're not the people who created the art.
No, and they're not even like, you could liken it to saying you're going to watch your favorite TV station or listen to your favorite radio station,
Sure. Yeah.
but those stations will curate a program schedule and
Hmm.
commission programs that were about, you know, about a particular scene or topic or whatever, and um, it's not the same as a platform which is just hungrily gobbling up content to acquire on a business model, basically based on continual acquisition of new um, listeners or viewers,
Right.
and that is precarious, I think, because one day you run out.
Yeah.
and and yeah, it's if you say, "Oh, I'm going to listen to Spotify tonight," and it's like, well, what are you listening to?
Hmm.
Um, and when people go on and they don't know what they're going to listen to,
Yeah.
then they just have the discovery, algorithmic based discovery that is served to them,
Yeah.
which is it's funny that sometimes we've got Google Home at home, and um, we got sick of Spotify and really fed up with it. And not that YouTube Music is much better, but we because I use YouTube a lot in lots of different ways for work, and because I know people there, and they sponsored the Say Award for a while, and we were at YouTube Music did, and we were quite fond of them because of that. Um, uh, we switched to using YouTube Music, and it's funny. There's sometimes we ask it to play a tune, and the stuff that it plays afterwards, I'm like, how do you get from that to this? And
Yeah.
and it's just annoying. Even when the tunes that come on afterwards are good, it irritates me. You know, I suppose like the DJ and music journalist in me gets very irked by the fact they don't go together. But
Hmm.
there's there's one tune that my 5-year-old daughter loves from a quirky Rowan Atkinson Netflix series, mini series, Man versus Bee, and
Mm.
is Just an Illusion by Imagination, for a bit of kind of soulful, slightly electronic pop, funk kind of pop.
Hmm.
Um, and every tune that YouTube Music chooses after that is an absolute floor-filling disco banger. I know, I know. So and reliably. So, but I've actually not found that many other. I don't know what it is about that the algorithm with what other stuff we listen to, it just works. But in general, um, well, it's not that it's gone away, but I miss specialist radio. You know, I revel in
Right.
listening to radio presenters who love what they're into and curate it and share it. And I think that in in the mainstream form of media consumption, that has gone away,
Yeah.
and that has been marginalized, and I think that's a real shame.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I was the music director of my college radio station as well, so I fell in love with that format. And my first job after school was working at a radio station in Chicago that
Oh wow.
had these DJs. Even at the time, this was when I first started there was 2012,
Hmm.
um, and of course at that time, like already like the personal relationships that I think people had with their DJs, for a long time had begun to decline. Um, just because they weren't as prevalent. I think the stations were dictating like more, more stringent rules about what types of music could be played next to what types of music, and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
different play counts for certain songs
yeah.
that you needed. So this radio station WXRT was kind of an anomaly at this point, and a lot of the DJs had been there for 35 years, on air every single day.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and that was such a special place to be, and these people like throughout Chicago were revered, because they were like the personalities, the people who'd been curating their music, for their entire lives. Yeah, and I think, I just mentioned that to, kind of lament, the loss of this really important role that we have in culture of like these curators who help us to find things that it's otherwise, too difficult to find, the things that resonate with us. So
Yeah,
I miss that too.
absolutely. I think that's really important to have those kind of um, arbiters of taste, who like you don't need to agree with them, but they can
Yeah.
expose you to really interesting things. That music discovery now is it can happen all over the place, and sometimes I hear stuff that's used as bed music or theme music on YouTube uh, videos that I think, oh, that's really good,
Mhm.
and lots of film and TV soundtrack stuff that like source music rather than score, like music that's sourced from existing catalogs rather than original composition. Not that that's not uh, great as well, but in terms of discovering different tunes, a lot of stuff I've uh, come to has been through drama and documentaries that just happen to use great music,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's where Shazam is an incredible tool.
Mhm.
Um, Although sometimes it does detract a bit when you're at a gig or in a
Sure.
nightclub or
Yeah.
a bar, and and everyone's shazamming every track.
Yeah.
Some
Totally.
of the mystique is gone.
Yeah. True. I guess we can't have it all.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
The mystique and the tools
Yeah. Yeah.
transcend the mystique. um, but that was perfect actually, because the first question in part two of this conversation is how you discover music, and I think you just started to broach that. And I wonder if you could just continue to flesh that out a little through the context of some of your favorite curators and outlets and platforms that you spend time with. I know you've already mentioned some of them, but if there are any others that come to mind.
Um, Used to be quite a lot of music blogs and things, and I loved Hype Machine.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but that's probably a bit less these days. Um, I find, although it has changed a bit since it was bought out and became part of a bigger company, I think that Bandcamp is still an interesting place
Yeah.
to go and discover music, because there is a kind of alternative to mainstream aesthetic because of the nature of how it works as a kind of more DIY platform for selling music. And I've discovered loads of interesting stuff through that. Um, Lots of recommendations from friends still, and sharing stories about music and what you're into. And then I have to plug something that I still find every year a great way of finding new music in Scotland is a project that I helped set up in 2012. Because in 2009 and 2010, I joined the board of the Scottish Music Industry Association, trade
Mhm.
body for music, and I eventually became vice chair of that. And when was that? 2010, 2011. And in 2012, the chair at that point, Stuart Henderson, who was from the record label Chemical Underground and the indie band The Delgados. And we worked closely together and with a handful of other people and support from the Scottish Government set up the Scottish Album of the Year Award, SAY Award, which has become Scotland's national music prize. And every year, I went on to become the chair of the SMIA in 2016 until I eventually stood down in March 23. A year passed when I'd wanted to, but the board persuaded me to stay on to help with a few things. And it was an amazing experience leading the organization through the pandemic when the live sector was decimated was intensely challenging, but I don't know if I'd say exciting because it was it was so difficult, but there was it was ultimately quite rewarding when we managed to unlock um, government funding and support for a lot of commercial operators in the live sector who would otherwise have gone bust.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, with the evolution of the SAY Award as Scotland's National Music Prize, there's a really good um, system that Stuart kind of devised and we have refined collectively over the years, where each year there's an eligibility phase. So um, anyone can submit an album for free to be considered by a pool of 100 nominators who are mostly from the media, but some other aspects of the music industry, as long as it doesn't have a conflict of interest with any of the eligible albums. And those nominators then draw from this pool of last year. Well, this year, I think there was nearly 400 albums submitted.
Mm.
So it's pretty comprehensive
Mm-hmm.
in terms of Scotland's musical output in that year, and then that is the nominators the aggregate of their selection creates the top 20, which is the long list, and then a panel of judges and a public vote determine a short list of 10. And so that long list of 20 each year is a great digest.
Yeah, I bet.
Very eclectic. It just, the way it works out is usually pretty pan genre. And but if you've got, that also the catalogue of the eligible albums is available on the SAY Award website, and up 300 to 400 albums there, all contemporary, right across the board, genre wise, and side from artists, out their back bedroom through to international stars, and so it's really is a really great way of discovering new music.
Yeah.
And I think music prizes in general around the world are really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good. I haven't really thought to plumb, those catalogs. So I'm going to spend more time doing that.
Yeah, because you can look at the national prizes for different parts of the world, and who's on their long list or short list or whatever,
Right.
and it's a snapshot of the musical tastes or or the musical output of that country in that year,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really interesting
Yeah.
to see and you can kind of hear an evolution of it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I have a lot of homework ahead. Okay, my next question for you, you've actually already answered half of it, but it is the first album that you ever purchased and then the most recent album that you purchased.
The the first album that I ever got was the Jungle Book soundtrack.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and
The
then
one you forgot, you didn't purchase that one.
I didn't purchase it. The
I see.
first one I purchased was, I think, the soundtrack to Led Zeppelin's farewell tour. The song remains the same.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Which I had on cassette and
Mhm.
loved and played along to, or tried to,
Cool.
on the guitar and the bass. And then most recently, probably the most recent one, well, this is again another plug because this is for an album that my brother Tommy Perman did with his friend Andrew Wasilic, and it's a lovely kind of dreamy jazz soundscape with a dark electronic undertone to it.
Cool.
I've actually I've forgotten the title of it, so I'm gonna have to look it up. And they did a tour recently, which was brilliant, just the two of them. And Andrew plays. He's been Communal Imagination. No, that's the song. Um, Andrew's been nominated for the SAY Awards
Oh, cool.
3 times.
Wow.
So maybe their album will be next year, and because I'm not involved anymore, there'll be no conflict of interest. So that's
Right.
good. And their album's called sorry.
No worries.
Well, I think the album is called one of the tracks is called Ash Grey and the Gull Glides On by Tommy Perlman and Andrew
Ash
Westlake.
Gray and the Gold glides on.
Yeah, the Gull Glides On, yeah.
Cool.
But also the SAY Award winning album this year, which I really like. It's by an Edinburgh band called Redolent, and the album's called Dinny Greet, which in Scots means don't cry. It's quite a sort of I suppose 20-something angst record, and but a kind of wonderful, punchy electronic pop and indie pop, and I was really taken by it. Actually, I really like it.
Cool. Well, perhaps that's that's one of your answers for this the next question I have. But 3 artists of note that you've heard for the first time in approximately the past year or so.
Ooh. Well, yeah, would they be one? Maybe. So yeah, I'm not. With no disrespect to Redolent, I don't know how much of an impact they've had on me yet, but I think, yeah, I do like them. There was another SAY Award nominated artist who I was really well. It's not the first time I heard her within last year, so it probably doesn't count. But called Becky Sakasa, who's a kind of soul R&B singer. I think it's just stunning. There's so another music media project that my company has is in 2015 we started traditional Scottish music YouTube channel and like web TV brand as a kind of sister brand to Radio Magnetic, but this is all about trad and folk music, and it grew out of work we were doing with the National Piping Centre, the bagpipe school in Scotland, and streaming bagpipe competitions, which is very intense and esoteric, but with a huge following in North America. And we saw what an appetite there was for traditional Scottish music online with stuff we were doing video streams of. So we started our own channel, and there are some music showcases that we follow, and we've that we work with, and we film the showcasing artists, and we discovered a lot of really interesting music through that. There was some music from around the world, like some in Glasgow every winter in January and just into February. There's a festival called Celtic Connections, and there's some brilliant music from all around the world comes and plays there. And the industry showcase part of it, called Showcase Scotland, our station Trad TV partners with that, and we film some great showcases. And through that, in the last year or so, I've discovered some artists that I really love. Like there's a duo called Australian duo called Charm of Finches, um, and sort of a bit like First Aid Kit,
Mm,
with tinges of Bjork and Joanna Newsom, perhaps.
cool.
Um,
Nice.
um, and so I loved them. And uh, there was a Canadian, an Irish Canadian, um, or she's Irish, but she lives in Canada. I think she's got some Canadian heritage. Um, Woman called I goes by the name Irish Maithen,
Mm,
and singer songwriter, and she like very powerful kind of protest song sort of stuff, just her and a guitar, who we filmed, and I was really struck by her.
mm,
Um, One of my favourite Scottish bands at the moment is beautiful, introspective, kind of melodic, soundscapey music, or it's quite cinematic, really. Five-piece band called Constant Follower,
mm.
but I didn't discover them in the last year, so that wouldn't count. Um, there's a really interesting four-piece for women called Bird Vox, which is kind of it's inspired by birdsong, but it's kind of quite punchy electronic electro pop, um, but melodic electro pop songs, um, but yeah, somehow inspired by birdsong, and uh, that really struck me. Um, and then a very quirky, well, very hard to define, but it's called Jemima and the Fuse. And Jemima plays the didgeridoo, Jew's harp, and mouth organ, and occasionally the guitar. And then um, her musical partner, um, who is the Fuse, plays lots of percussion and some electronics, and it's just really abstract, strange, but somehow very catchy songs. Um,
Cool.
which I was very struck by.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. I have even more homework now. um, okay, cool. So my last question for you is the big one. You're going to a deserted island and you get to bring 3 records with you.
Oh, only three. Oh, yeah. So I'm a huge fan of Desert Island Discs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's eight, I think that
Is
they
it 8?
do.
Well,
Yeah, I
I've
think
made
it's
it hard.
eight. Yeah, and but I'm constantly redrawing what I would take with that. So
Fair.
three. Well, I think possibly my favorite, like it changes, but one of my favorite songs of all time, which I consider a perfect pop song,
Mm,
is "Ain't Too Proud to Beg" by the Temptations.
mm.
It's under 3 minutes. The middle eight has a sax solo in it that has only one note. Um, it's just a um, brilliant in your face Motown pop song, and it it always makes me happy. So I think I would definitely take that. Um,
Just as a single?
yeah. Oh well, well.
Might as well
Um,
like try to find a greatest hits compilation of some kind that you can
well,
bring.
I've got it on a greatest hits compilation, which has got a
Yeah.
lot of live versions of Temptation. So if I'm
Mm,
allowed to take an album, then it would be the one that's on.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. And I think actually I first heard it on the Temptations compilation, All the Million Sellers,
Mm,
for
okay.
every all their records that sold over 1 million copies,
Oh,
um, which were loads. And well, if it, I've always debated whether this one would be a good idea to play, so it would do my head in to be listening to it too many times. But um, and this is very abstract and perhaps a little bit pretentious, but the Vinci's Rite of Spring, because I think it's one of the most um, uh, strange and challenging, but hauntingly beautiful pieces of neoclassical music.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was studying music at school and then studying stuff around music in theatre at university, I always thought that that was an amazing piece. And I've seen it. I've seen ballet performed to it a few times, and it's it's amazing moments in it. A lot of it's very difficult to listen to and a bit too challenging, but there's some amazing moments in it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to explore in it.
Do you have a particular recording of it that you would bring?
Yes, but I can't remember who did it. It's a record that my mum owns that I might have pinched. I think I do have, but I can't. Bear with me a second. I'll see if I find it because it's on a record that's got his Symphony for Wind Instruments in it
Okay.
on the B side, which is a beautiful piece. It's by Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal
Huh.
and conducted by Charles Dutot. So I'll send you
Okay.
that for the notes. But yeah, I didn't know. I didn't realize it was by a Montreal orchestra.
Yeah.
And it's got I can't remember. There's an impressionist artist. The cover is that I can't remember who it is that actually does. And that's of the
I
dancing.
recognize that. Yeah.
And then I would have to take an electronic album. I'm trying to think what my favorite would be. That would, if it was techno, it would probably be High Tech Jazz by Underground Resistance. But if I can take an album, then maybe Double Figure by Plaid, Warp, or might be a Ninja Tune compilation, because I always loved, like, Warp and Ninja Tune were my two favorite record labels, really. But yeah, I'd probably be as bold as to say Double Figure by Warp, which I played a lot when it came out, and played a lot on Radio Magnetic and in nightclubs.
Cool. Okay, that's a good trio. Eclectic.
Yeah, should always be eclectic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're alone on a deserted island. You need to account for all of the different moods.
Yes,
have.
yeah.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much all we've got, Dougal. For people who are listening, who want to get involved in the work that you're doing, read more about you, follow along. What's a good place to do that?
Well, these days, in terms of social media, I'm most active on LinkedIn, actually, where I tend to talk about culture and the importance of the creative economy quite a lot, which I'm passionate about, and making some headway in our kind of campaigning to have more investment in culture from the Scottish government. That I'm still very involved in that sort of thing. And then through my company's website, innerear.co.uk, and then we've got 3 creative brands. There's radiomagnetic.com. It's still going in the background of what I do these days, looked after by 2 of its key contributors, Vicky Troop and Davy Kelly, who are legends who run Radio Magnetic, and much love for them. And then tradtv.scot, or tradtv on YouTube, Radio Magnetic on Mixcloud as well, I should say. And then we have our own series of audio walking tours, Walking Heads, and the flagship tour that we have is a Glasgow Music History Tour, which is
I want to do that.
yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great to do. Next time you're in Glasgow, it's fun to do in person on the in the locations, but you can also listen to it remotely.
Cool.
Um,
Well, yeah, I'll be back up to Glasgow soon enough. I'm gonna add that to my
yeah,
to-do list.
cool.
Cool. Okay, and last question for you. Now that you've been through the ringer, so to speak, for the record, who is another
Mhm.
music head that we should have on the show?
Well, I would probably say my old colleague and friend Robert Kilpatrick, who's the chief exec and creative director of the SMIA, the Scottish Music Industry Association, and he also has a music management company that he runs with his friend. Stina Tweedale from the band Honeyblood, and their company's called Ice Blink Luck. But Robert is as obsessive about music as anyone I know, and a real champion of contemporary Scottish music through the Say Award and so on, but also just passionate about great music everywhere, and kind of lives and breathes it and fights to represent and serve it.
Cool. Cool. I love
Yeah,
that.
he would be a good person, I think.
Okay, got it. Noted. Cool. Well, that's all we've got. Thank you so much, Dougal. I've really appreciated this time with you and hearing more of your story.
No, thank you. I'm delighted. That has been really interesting, and yeah, it's lovely to have been asked to do it, and great talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Good. I'm happy to hear. That was the goal. Mutual
Yeah.
enjoyment.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks everyone for being here. That is a wrap on another episode of For the Record, a conversation series with all manner of music heads about their stories and the music that makes them. It's a production of Grey Matter and the new Crate Coalition experiment in building connected listening graphs. We stamp every music mention that you heard here, from the names of musicians to DJs to journalists to venue owners. And in the background, we're mapping these names to form those yet unseen connective threads between them. Getting involved? Check out our website, greymatter.fm. It's Grey with an E. Or you can come hang out in the Crate Coalition Discord. We'll see you next time.